I declare the Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 21st of June 2022 held in Council Chambers at the City of Subiaco, open at 5:31pm. Welcome councillors, staff, media and members of the community. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. Please note this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. We're still in hybrid mode, so it looks like we've got 7 elected members here in person with 2 attending electronically, and we've got a combination of in-person and electronic attendances from our staff as well. Looks like there'll be no apologies for this evening and no leave applications for leave of absence submitted ahead of time. So I'll call for any disclosures of interest. I understand there's at least one. Councillor De Vries.
It's not going on here. Rosemary De Vries wished to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 21st of June 2022 and 28th of June 2022. Agenda item C4, impartiality, pursuant to clause 22 of the Code of Conduct. The nature of my interest is I know one of the nominees for the DAKE and consider him to be a friend. This will have no impact on how I select nominees for the DAKE.
Thank you. Okay, any announcements by the presiding member can probably wait until next week, so we'll get straight into the agenda items, beginning with item C1. Yes, Councillor Burns.
Yeah, thank you.
You've got a declaration, do you?
No, but I'm having the same. I might, if I drop off and just go to my name only, I'm having the same problems the CEO did the other day with bandwidth, which will increase and make it more effective if I have to remove my image and just participate by listening in. But I'm going to try and stay with it for a minute and see how I go, but I have been having difficulty.
Okay, thanks for letting me know, Councillor Burns. It's probably not too much of an issue today, but next week we'll need to be able to see you and hear you to consider you in attendance and to take votes, but for tonight it should be okay. Yeah,
I believe it's a temporary issue. Basically, they're trying to fix the tower. I've been advised of it, so I don't see any issue next week, but I appreciate
Great.
the comment.
Okay, C1, proposed modified Kings Road heritage area and draft amended local planning policy. Any questions about that item? Okay, item C2, proposed modified Chester's subdivision heritage area and draft amended local planning policy. Any questions? Councillor Powell.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mayor. It's in regard to one of the properties mentioned, I think, at 79 Hammersley Road. The owners of that property have been quite clear. I think that they really don't want it listed in any way as part of a precinct, saying that you can't really see it because of the front fence, and that there's been substantial modifications or changes to the building, the fabric of the building. So I'm wondering why we would be essentially insisting that they accept listing. Thank you. Or in the precinct.
Acting Director.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So we undertook an assessment of the property, and since a previous assessment nearly 10 years ago, there have been some modifications to that property which have actually improved the heritage value that we see in it. So it was an objective assessment undertaken with some of the restoration that has occurred, and that's all quite well detailed in the response to the schedule of submissions. Now, it's our recommendation that that property does have some heritage value, consistent with other similar properties in the area. So it is then up to council on whether or not it wishes to include it within the area or not.
Councillor White.
Finished. Sorry, thank you. On page 12, table 1, which looks at 79 and 84, and the issues arise around that. I guess my question just is, a lot of this seems very perception-based, very qualitative in the judgments being formed either by the landowner or the officer's recommendation in terms of the extent to which you can glimpse the front in the case of 79, or the case in which further restoration would be required or things removed to get it back to its norm. It seems very, how can I put it, very grey, very qualitative, very much based on the eye of the beholder. And I'm wondering if there's any guidance you can give us in relation to how we interpret these different perceptions, both of the different stakeholders that are presented in table 1.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, that's absolutely correct. A very easy definition of heritage is what we value to keep into the future. So people's values are very different. Now, there is an overarching legislative framework in the Heritage Act and the city's heritage assessment. So all the policy settings, what they do is they provide for a base level of assessment, and generally for heritage areas, it's how the homes would interact with the street interface. So an assessment has been done to consider that there is a strong connection with the public realm, and that looks at both the originality of the dwelling, any alterations made, and how they may have been restored to the original fabric. It's undertaken by heritage professionals and also the city's heritage coordinator as well. So while I understand it is subjective in a sense, that's heritage in a nutshell, guided by the legislation and the policies that we have, which help guide our assessment. So all of our assessment is based on those policies and legislation.
Thanks. Just one more, I guess. I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Why would someone object to this? In both cases, I'm trying to understand, is it because there are increased obligations on them? I understand later, well, yeah, I think maybe just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So what heritage does is it includes a layer of assessment for a local government. So without a heritage area or heritage listing, a property essentially can be demolished. A single house can be demolished with any consideration by a local government. Now, putting in a layer of heritage means that there needs to be consideration on that, and the decision maker, being the local government, can approve that and can make those decisions, or not approve it, or approve it with some conditions. So there is a perception that heritage is an additional layer, and people would like to be able to do what they like with their properties. However, the planning system is there to protect significant heritage. There are other reasons why people may object. So some people consider it to be a financial obligation on them, and that it might decrease, the value of the property. We don't see that that's the case, and it's not necessarily a planning consideration in any event. So and just to go further on your question, the city's planning policies and heritage policies actually include a number of incentives. Essentially, in a heritage area, it is how that home interacts with the public realm. Most additions and changes behind that home, or behind what's visible from the public realm, are actually quite acceptable and don't necessarily need a planning approval. And the city actually has policies that say that if a planning approval wouldn't have been required, should there not have been heritage, then the fee is waived. So there are a number of incentives we've built in as well.
Thank you. My last. Again, it's a naive question, I think, but in the next item we're going to discuss, the sentence is used, it has no instrument for development control. That sentence is not used here in this item. And yet you've just said that, as I understood it, that it's maybe a layer, but it's not controlling development at any point. So maybe I'm misunderstanding C3 and C2 and the distinctions between them. But as I understood it, then you've answered, I understood you answered this being, it might be a layer, but it's actually not really a planning consideration in C2. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely right, and through you, Mayor. So your question was about heritage. Now, the difference in the C1 and C2 are a local heritage survey. So what they are is just an information gathering source, and they don't actually have any statutory implications. It's when something is formally listed either as a heritage place or a heritage area, which is what the item at C3 is, my apologies, C1 and C2 are. C3 is a survey. So it's a heritage area listing under the scheme that provides us these statutory implications.
Councillor De Vries.
Thank you. Yeah, through you, Mayor. This is just a follow-up question regarding the comment you made that it does actually act as an instrument, in my understanding, that the owner who, for example, doesn't want to be on the item on the list is concerned perhaps that they won't be able to demolish their property. Would it be correct that council could refuse a development application that includes the application to demolish a property? I know you've said that doesn't apply for the survey, but for the area that seems to apply, or have I misunderstood that? Because we need to clarify that really clearly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor De Vries. Yes, that's correct. So for heritage areas or heritage lists, there would need to be an application if someone wanted to demolish the property, and council would need to consider that in accordance with the policy framework.
So through you, Mayor, so it would be the understanding of the owner when they don't want to have their property on that list, that their home ownership perhaps takes precedence over the wider needs of the community. So is it my understanding that council, whichever council would be making that decision, would be able to interpret, so it's on the list or it's on the area, they would be in the position to determine the homeowner's choices in that case. Is that correct?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, all planning, all applications have a layer of planning over it, whether it's under the without a heritage area or with a heritage area. So, what heritage is just another layer for consideration within the wider planning framework. There are very powerful heritage provisions which actually incentivise some really good development, which you may not be able to achieve without heritage. So we don't necessarily see it as an obstacle, we see it as a positive thing in the city, and that's consistent with the city's strategic community plan.
Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, through you, Mayor. I'd just like to go back to this demolition issue, because I believe there can be confusion about it. Is it not true that a dwelling in a heritage area can be demolished, but it requires an approved plan, and that's why effectively it has to come to council? Whereas a dwelling that is not in a heritage area can be demolished without a plan, and you could have an empty block sitting there for, evermore. But there's definitely that distinction. He's nodding his head, so thank you for that clarification. The other...
Thank you, and Sorry, Councillor Stroud, just to clarify that, it's a planning application. So council is still a decision maker, and if there's a really good argument to demolish a heritage building, then it can then make that decision as well.
Are you saying even with a heritage listed building? Yeah, even with a heritage listed building as against a home in a heritage area. The other that I believe does confuse people is the survey listing, where I think sometimes homeowners think that if they're on a list, their home is classified as a heritage home, but it is not. It is purely a listing of those homes in that heritage area. It's like an assessment. Would that be correct?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. It's probably a good time just to be clear that there are 3 heritage proposals on this agenda. So C1 and C2 are the formal statutory heritage application, and C3 is just an information. So that's the local heritage survey, which I believe you're asking about now. So that is only an information gathering resource. However, the proposals at C1 and C2, just to be clear, are to apply the heritage statutory provisions, which require the development approval.
Any other questions about C2? Okay, C3 then. And that, of course, is in relation to the draft West Subiaco Precinct Local Heritage Survey. Councillor De Vries.
Yeah, just a few questions through you, Mayor. Just I'll start with, first off, the estimated cost of this survey. It seems like Stephen Carrick Architects have done a very detailed assessment based on information that they've garnered from different sources. So I just wonder if you've got that overall costing so far of that survey. Thanks. That's the first question. I have a few more to go. Thanks.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, we'll take that on notice and provide that to you. I understand that it was within the city's budget, but we'll give you the exact amount.
Follow-up question, yeah, through you, Mayor, again. Just in terms of how assessments are made, and I think this goes back to the qualitative kind of assessments judged on creating a framework. I don't want to sort of name a particular house or street because that identifies the person's house, and I'm not actually trying to do that. But I know on one of the houses, which is a more recent contemporary house, maybe of the 1950s, it does describe that in a way in glowing terms. And I think it would be fair to say that for many people looking at that particular residence, it would be fair to say that it isn't a particularly representative of, say, what we consider heritage. So I just wanted to clarify, in my opinion, am I wrong in thinking that sometimes we're identifying the history of a home and labelling it with a heritage sort of framework, or is it pretty rigid? Is the heritage framework sort of pretty solid, and it's impossible to kind of create a narrative that's kind of, I'm just seeing that as being a slightly strange choice of home to put on a heritage survey. So I can't name that, obviously, without disclosing what it is. Thank you. That's fair enough, yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, some of the homes don't appear to be heritage in that sort of long-term sense of, so that's the question. So if it's a more contemporary home, when is the cut-off? Like, do we have a cut-off for when it's not considered heritage, or can it go right into the 70s? This home I'm identifying as a 50s home, so that's why it sort of came off as being a bit of an odd one to put on a heritage list. Thank you.
Yeah, great question, actually, and through you, Mayor. So there's no time limit on heritage. So heritage is what the city values to keep into the future. So that could be something that might be very old, and there is some nostalgia in that, and certain development styles that fit into the building of Subiaco. But it could be things such as the Wandana complex, which was built more recently, because that's got value in social housing, being one of the first social housing complexes. So there's no time limit on it. It's about what people value into the future and what council values. And I think the CEO's got a little bit more to add.
Just by way of example, another local government has, or a number of local governments have the Ivanov type properties. So they were built predominantly in the 70s. So I think the Masala home in Dinella is one of those. It was the first 70s property that was registered. So certainly can happen.
Manager Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. And just to add to the CEO and Acting Director Petrovsky, so with heritage and the local heritage survey, it doesn't necessarily have to be the age of a building. So looking at the cultural heritage values, it could be for aesthetic value, historic value, scientific value, social value, which doesn't necessarily restrict the time as has been previously identified. So there are some times where there's listings or there's properties on the heritage survey that are identified that are not necessarily very old, but they have their own intrinsic value, and then from there there's different levels of significance, and also that's worked through. So when you look through the consultant's report, you can see how each one has been assessed.
Councillor De Vries, you've got a few more questions? Okay.
Yeah, through you. Just a last question. Just in terms of how people who are on this register or this survey, have they all been given the opportunity to have input to the report because they may have additional information to provide? And if so, how was that done? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So yeah, the officer's report outlines the, I guess, the consultation that this has gone through. So it has been quite extensive. There's preliminary engagement that is undertaken through a heritage reference group. There's also advertising done, which is just recently completed. So everyone that did have a heritage survey done of their property has been invited to comment on it explicitly.
Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. I'm just a little bit relieved that this is the agenda briefing forum, the meeting, because I've realised that I should make a disclosure for C3, and that is that the property that I co-own with my husband is on here and is marked in green, and that's because I nominated the house for inclusion. So I'd just like to make that disclosure for tonight, and I'll make sure it's done correctly for the decision meeting. That is it. No questions.
Wasn't expecting that. Well, look, I'll ask a couple of questions. The first is, when was this precinct last surveyed? I just couldn't see that from the officer report.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. I understand it was 2002 to 2003, so quite some time ago. There has been some ad hoc reviews since then, but nothing substantial compared to what has been done by this one.
Okay, thanks. So my second question then is, can you just walk us through the process of how the consultant is going to go about updating the previous survey? Are they going to focus on just properties that have had changes since 2002, 2003, or do they go right back to the start and look at all properties afresh?
Thank you, through you, Mayor McMullen. So the report has been essentially prepared, and that's what council is considering. So they did take into consideration, I guess, the previous or the current West Subiaco precinct local heritage survey, and then that was used as a basis in addition to the nomination process to consider new inclusions going forward.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we're finished with C3. Okay, C4 relates to the Disability Access and Inclusion Committee, and next week at least I note we'll have to discuss the personal affairs of people, so we'll quite possibly do that behind closed doors. Can I just have an indication of whether anyone wants to talk about individuals tonight, or can we just stick to what's in the report? Okay, we'll try and do it in the open. Are there any questions about C4? Easy. Okay, C5, the proposed implementation of food organics, garden organics, also known as FOGO. Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you. And through you, Mayor, I've sent in a number of questions about this, so I thought it'd be a good idea if I put my hand up first to kick it off. The first one relates to the fact that the report is suggesting for those extra piles of rubbish that obviously the larger branches that would not go into a FOGO bin, they're suggesting that you could use one of your Verge Valet services. What my question is asking is instead, can the city provide a bulk green waste pickup once or twice a year? Thank you.
Are you the acting director at the moment? No. Manager.
Sorry, I'll refer that to the acting manager, operations and environment.
Thank you, through you, Mayor McMullen. Yeah, we could possibly offer an additional green waste collection. We hadn't factored that into the modelling that was part of the report, but figures that I got recently suggest that to go out to tender for that, one annual collection would cost around 71 to 72 grand. Or if we were to add an additional Verge Valley green waste collection, we're looking at $38 per tonne for per collection, and what do we have it here? Yeah, $38 per tonne per collection, and $139 a tonne for processing costs ex GST. So. We hadn't had time to get that modelled yet.
So, thank you. So the answer is yes, we could, but it will obviously cost. There's a layer of cost to it, and there's cost to everything we do, particularly in waste. Thank you. The next question I have is green waste. Oh yes, we know that the current green waste bag system is popular in the city. Do we have an idea if that is 60% of dwellings, leaving out apartment blocks and things? Do we have an idea of what percentage that would be of the city? Thank you, through you, Mayor.
Thank you, through you, Mayor McMullen. We don't have any stats on that, but we don't record any of that, how many households utilise the service, but it is estimated that around 65 to 70% of households do utilise that service.
Thank you. So is it reasonable to perhaps assume that the remaining 30 to 40% are perhaps putting their cuttings, their green waste, their dead flowers into residual waste, and that is actually the most expensive way of disposing our waste? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor McMullen. The most recent bin tagging that we carried out in the city showed that approximately 13% of household waste or general waste bins had green waste in them. So Yes, and yes, that is the most expensive way of disposing of your green waste.
Because that waste is going to landfill and not to be reprocessed for compost. So sorry, with your accent, was that 30% or 13?
13. 13. 1, 3. 13.
If I can ask another question too, thank you. In regard to going FOGO, it is a legislative requirement and it is also part of our waste plan. But what if we don't? What if we resist going to FOGO, at least by the time parameters? What do you think could happen?
Thank you, through you, Mayor McMullen. Yeah, there are fines that could be applied by the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation. They can't enforce it. And I think they have enforced that legislation.
I might answer a little bit broader if I can, and just to answer a couple of questions. Before council, when you're making decisions, it's always important to consider sustainability issues under the Act as well. And so the point you made earlier around the cost, it's more expensive to have green waste in the red top bin. Absolutely. It's also a poorer environmental outcome given, as you said, it's not used then for mulch and the like. So this is a question around what the state government will do, and I suppose it's a little bit of crystal ball gazing, but they do have a range of instruments that they could use for local government that doesn't conform to the requirements of FOGO for 2025. I think the most likely, although they haven't said this, is around the waste levy for landfill, and I suspect also a possible levy on waste to energy, because that would make the most sense in terms of getting people's attention and making it highly cost ineffective to continue in the way in which they do. But there are a range of parts within their Act that they can compel certain things to happen, and they can then charge us back for updating our plans, etc. So, yeah, I would recommend that all local governments meet the 2025 deadline.
Two more questions. Thank you, Mayor, and thanks for your patience, elected members. The next question is, it's interesting because I just think I've sensed this a little bit from the community. It doesn't matter if you fill your FOGO bin or with food or 100% with green waste or 10% with food and green waste and so on. I've had comments from residents that they're already putting their scraps in their garden. And I believe that that's okay. If you fill your FOGO bin all with green waste, that is fine. And we will take your chop bones because they don't compost so well. And oranges and lemons aren't very good for your worms anyway. So am I correct with that? Thank you.
Yeah, I might answer, and perhaps also the other question about the current system being popular. It's difficult to know because there's no alternative. So, but the point that you make is that yes, the most important bit of having 3 bins and the greatest challenge is separation at source. But if you're currently using some of those products for your own mulching, that's great. Just make sure whichever bin it is, you put the right things in them. But as you say, there's a whole range of other things, including your pet feces and those sorts of things that can go in the FOGO bin. So there's a whole range of other things as well. But if you just want to continue to do what you currently do, so long as the clean green waste is going in that bin, that's good too.
My last of the 2 questions, thank you. Will residents have a choice in size of bins? As you know, we used to have 3 bins, but I've noticed there is some anxiety about now having a 3rd bin and where it will go and so on. So will we be giving residents choices in the different litre size bins? Thank you. Probably for all 3 type now. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mayor McMullen. The standard size for a FOGO bin is 240. So we hadn't considered the option of a smaller size bin, but we may be able to do so.
So I might answer as well. In the pack, in the report, articulates the litre sizes that are recommended of the particular type bins. If, given that we're four beautiful leafy suburbs, that the elected members think it's appropriate to offer a larger bin or some choice, I'd recommend that be in the FOGO bin. So potentially allowing those that wish to, and we could price that up, a 360 litre for the FOGO bin. But wouldn't necessarily recommend that for the recycling bin, given that there's a number of other streams for recycling now, like cash for cans and those sorts of things. So I wouldn't recommend that on the recycling bin. And the residual waste, or the red bin, that's heavily prescribed. So the maximum you could probably move up to would be 140 litres to stay within the requirements, but that really wouldn't give you too much more. Having said that, with that, we do have other services for a 240 litre bin that cost more. I think they're $500 odd something, so it's significantly greater, and we understand that that's a reasonable approach. So there are some people that will still have the red bin 240, and they're basically paying a much higher fee. Not quite double, but almost.
Councillor De Vries.
I'll be quick. Given that Verge Valet has not yet been approved through you, Mayor, is there a conflict there that we're saying we use one of our Verge Valets for the possibly, and Councillor Stroud's already raised that problem, but should that not be approved at the end of the trial, would there be a problem then unrolling that, because we'd be looking at an alternative, creating an alternative then? So is there a problem there now if we link it to a trial, something that's on a trial period? Thank you.
If I could, through the chair, look, I don't see so, because that's the current thing that we're trialling. So at the end of the trial, if council resolve and say, actually, we didn't think that was effective, as and the feedback, you could say, okay, then we would have to go back to the alternative, which is the previous model, the bulk collection, and we would factor that pricing in, and that could be adjusted depending upon when it actually happened. That would just be adjusted through the following year's waste levy, because the way in which we manage that financially is through reserve. So if you do have a bit of an under because you had to change something, you can pick it up in the calculation that unfortunately the good people of Subiaco would have to pay at that other point in time when they're adopting the budget the following year. So it doesn't. The way in which we're recommending that is because that's the current service, although it's a trial, and if the council resolves to do something different, we'll calculate that, and that would then flow through in the previous year, the following year's waste levy.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. Just going back to what the Acting Manager Waste and Environment, the figures that were given earlier, $38 per collection for green waste plus the processing cost per tonne. So, but I think that was a Verge Valet collection. So right now with our green waste service, what does that, is there a per collection cost that's been worked out for that, just out of interest? What notional cost is given for that service? Could you just, I've got another question after this too. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mayor McMullen. No, there's not a per collection rate for that. It's purely a processing cost at the moment. I can't remember off the top of my head what it is right this second, but yeah, it's purely processing costs for the green waste collected.
Your second question, Councillor Jennings.
Thank you. If council was of a mind to keep this bulk the green waste, or part of the green waste collection service, some kind of weekly or fortnightly service where it's put on, the bigger items are put on the verge, for example, is that in breach of any requirement of these new laws to go to FOGO? So long as that gets properly processed, I couldn't imagine that could be the case, but is that still possible under FOGO? We're not prohibited from doing that if council was so minded.
Thank you, through you, Mayor McMullen. No, it's still possible.
Perhaps I'll just answer. So yeah, ultimately, if council believe that there's another service that is improves the collection of the larger branches, etc., then that's entirely possible for us to do, and it certainly would be consistent with our waste plan, etc., because ultimately that then gets mulched. So it's just another mechanism to collect those branches.
And I do have another question, if I may, Mayor.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. In the report on page, sorry, it's a bit 31, I think it's indicating, Councillor Stroud asked the question whether we can have different size bins for FOGO, but it seems to indicate in the table on page 31 of the agenda that we can additional bins. We can have an additional FOGO bin, or residents could, but that's at a cost of $575. So is that correct? If people want an extra FOGO bin, they could actually pay for it. Is that the case? Just to clarify, thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mayor McMullen. Yeah, that would be correct. Yep.
Okay. And then finally, this is once again bringing in Burge Valley, which sort of muddies the water a little bit because they're slightly different things, but sort of related but separate. With the Burge Valley service, does the WMRC say or to the CBE that it's not possible for us to allow our residents to substitute, not just do a Burge Valley collection, change one of their collections, which is bulk waste, to green waste? So if we're providing two bulk waste collections a year, I think, or is it only one? Sorry, I might be confusing myself, but I thought it was two. And if residents wanted to, is there any sort of restriction from WMRC that says, no, you can't, we're not going to allow Subi to allow its residents to use both collections for green waste?
Thank you, through you, Mayor McMullen. No, there's no issue with that. The WMRC is open to that.
Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I'm going to talk about babies' nappies. Given the city's stated position that nappies should not be placed in the red lid general bulk waste bin, what is the city's position in terms of offering cloth nappy rebates and free workshops as a means of encouraging young families to utilise cloth nappies?
I assume you're asking for someone else, Councillor Kosovich. Acting Manager.
Thank you, through you, Mayor McMullen. That's not something that we had considered at this point in time, so we can get back to you on that one.
Thank you. I have a follow-up to that once I've established that. As we know, disposable nappies invariably find their way into landfill and are bad for our environment as they take hundreds of years to break down. Many councils, Australia-wide, have a nappy rebate policy. By way of example, the town of East Fremantle and the City of Melville, the City of Coburn, offers rebates of 50% up to a maximum value of $100 on the purchase or hire of cloth nappies, while the City of Fremantle offers rebates of 50% up to a maximum value of $150 on the purchase or hire of cloth nappies. Can staff investigate, please, what would be the cost of adopting a nappy rebate policy in our community?
If I could, through the chair. Look, we can certainly look at that. I've read some counter claims in relation to the environmental benefits, and also probably what we'd want to get a bit of feedback from the WMRC as well in relation to what occurs with the residual waste through waste to energy as well. So I think there was a time a place where that was a very strong sentiment, but I think there's been additional research done in terms of the cleaning and other mechanisms as well. So I think, firstly, from an environmental and sustainability, economic as well, I think it'd be important for us to do that, and then give that information back to you as well in terms of whether that type of an approach has been also successful from the local governments that you've described. So there's two bits to it. It's like social as well as economic and environment, and I think that particular in terms of nappies has gone through a few iterations in terms of the sustainability of those two types of products. So we can do it. I think we hadn't thought about it in terms of the FOGO, but it's something that we can work through with the MRC and provide some more information for elected members.
Thank you, CEO. I understand it's very popular in the southern metropolitan local governments, and there's obviously a reason for that, and it is embraced Australia-wide, and I'd just like to have it investigated, please. Thank you.
Just on the back of Councillor Kosvich's questions, I think this might be one for the Director Technical Services, because someone's actually asked me about the possibility of a rebate program before, and I actually received advice from yourself, although in fairness it may have been one of your staff behind the wheel, but the advice at the time, Mr. Millard, was that initiatives such as this might be considered as part of the Community Climate Change Mitigation Plan that city officers had been working on in late December last year. Is that something you're in a position to speak to tonight, or would it be best that we take the whole thing on notice?
Through you, Madam, probably best to take that on notice. We are still working through the climate change document and the outcomes and recommendations. So if I could take that on notice, then we can provide some further information to elect yourself and elected members.
Okay, so it might be handled as part of our climate change response, potentially.
Yes.
Okay, Councillor Powell, did I see your hand going up?
Yes, and thank you. And through you, Mayor, I just want to start off with a broader question, if I can, about the equity of the system that's proposed to be introduced. Look, I know that it is, sort of a government mandate, but one would assume that people from apartments probably wouldn't be producing all that much garden waste. There's a lot of other people who don't, I think has been mentioned, use their kitchen scraps, for the garden. It would appear, just from what I've heard tonight, that 13% of people aren't doing the right thing, but then the other 87% are being instructed or penalised in a way for the actions of those 13%. Is there a question of equity, that everybody is now having to adopt a system because 10% of people, don't follow the rules?
If you could turn your microphone off.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm unsure that equity was ever a consideration by the Waste Authority. It was quite bullish in the way it went about it, predominantly, I suppose, because WA is pretty slow off the uptake in terms of the way in which we separated its source and opportunities for the circular economy. So, so it became government policy, but I'm not sure that there was equity considerations in that in relation to type of household and whether or not people are doing the right thing or not. So the approach is just to make greater use of food organics rather than just the garden organics as was the case in the past. But unless Rob or Alan want to correct me, I'm unsure that any equity issue was considered. It was predominantly an environmental outcome that they're seeking. I certainly am aware of other local governments that are challenging the 2025 date and challenging the methodology by which this came about in the first place. But all indications from the state government that I've had is that that date's pretty firm. So.
Yeah, through you, Mayor McMullen, if I could just add to that, that's correct. In support of what the CEO has just mentioned, I don't think there's any equity issues that were involved in the development of the way in which the War Act was progressed and developed.
Thank you, Councillor Powell.
So the ratepayer who approached me and said they felt they were being discriminated against might have had a point. I'd like to also ask a couple of questions about the system itself. It would appear that there are going to be more staff, it's going to cost ratepayers more, and yet this is going to be for a diminished service. Is that a good outcome for the city and for its ratepayers?
If I could...
Yeah, okay, CEO.
Slipped the gun a bit too quickly, apologies. So there is a slight increase in the price. However, it's certainly significantly less of an increase, if that makes sense in an English sense, than most other local governments when they've introduced FOGO. And the reason being is because of the heavy service that we do in relation to picking up green waste. So the way in which we do our waste has sort of meant that the increase in cost, particularly, and it's not a full year for FOGO, but that is not as big an increase as what most local governments have had when they've introduced FOGO. In terms of a superior service or less, the collection is via a bin rather than the bags that are currently in place, and some would argue that that's a better service, others will argue it's a worse service, so it's more of an opinion. We do note that some of those bags do go flying, etc. So whereas generally a 240 litre bin stays put. So there are some other issues as well. But the question before council, I suppose, is whether it wishes to go a little bit earlier or whether it wishes to wait until it's mandated with 2025. And I suppose what the officers have recommended is there's an opportunity, given we've applied through the Better Bins program as well, to reduce the cost relating to the new bins, that we recommend that we would proceed on the time frame that we've suggested. And I suppose, as I said, level of service is, I suppose, open to people's perceptions.
Yep. Go on, Councillor Powell.
Yeah, look, I think implicit in the suggestion that Verge Valet, a Verge Valet service may be converted into a green waste collection, almost means that, you know, there has got to be some sort of bulk green waste collection, Verge collection, you know, during the year, at least once, if not more. Is that a correct assumption?
Well, I suppose I can answer the question in terms of the tonnage, or Rob can answer the question in terms of the tonnage. But going back to equity, you might find that certain apartments and those sorts of things don't put out a lot of green waste during those bulk collections. But certainly, I think, how many have we done in the past? I'll hand over, but usually the first one is quite significant in terms of tonnage collected, and then if you do a second one, in my experience in the past, that's a lot less tonnage. But I'll hand over to the manager.
Thank you, through you, Mayor McMullen. Green waste, we're generally picking up around 700 tonnes per annum. So, yeah.
So the answer was about 700 tonnes of green waste, not all of which is bulk. So the issue is around, so whether it's Verge Valet or whether it's a bulk collection where people put it out and it's picked up in one hit, ultimately you're still likely to collect a similar amount regardless of the mechanism that you use, because generally people, as you say, once a year or twice a year will clean up their yards and do the prunings, etc. So that tonnage is probably the same, likely to be. All the difference would be the mechanism by which we collect it.
And look, I appreciate you've addressed this point before, but Verge, just to make clear that previous question, that was about, it was essentially saying the system that's being proposed acknowledges that we need to have some way of picking up the bigger green waste from the verge, you know, and that's implicit simply by saying, well, you can trade it. You know, I mean, what I'm saying is there's got to be some way, hasn't there got to be some way of the city arranging to have a bit larger green waste picked up from the verge, whether it's through Verge Valet or however. It's an acknowledgement that that service is required. Yep.
Thank you, Member McMullen. Through you, Member McMullen. Yes, we are acknowledging that potentially we would need to collect that larger green waste.
For those that didn't quite hear through the check, you've got to speak into the mic a little bit more, Manager. Apologies. And the Scottish accent doesn't help. We don't provide subtitles, unfortunately. The answer is yes, absolutely. I think our beautiful suburbs clear that there's a lot of trees that people have and pruning. So there is, and so the officer's recommendation is to switch one or more of the current mechanism, so although it's on trial, the current mechanism by which we would collect that type of waste. And that's what's recommended. But ultimately, if the council decide, we'll provide some additional costs. Obviously, it's $72,000 per annum to do one bulk green waste, and we'll do the modelling on that to determine how much additional cost that would be, and council may choose to go down that path. But absolutely, the fact that the report indicates to switch one across means that is something, and as has been suggested, probably if people prefer two rather than a white good collection, I suppose that would be reasonable as well.
Councillor Powell.
Yeah, look, hopefully the last question. You mentioned again the trial. Should we be during a trial instituting something that's different? You know, but surely the purpose of a trial is to see whether it works or not. And at the moment, we're almost presuming that it will work, so therefore in the future, people can trade a green waste collection for a valet verge collection. It sort of seems to be putting the cart before the horse.
Ultimately, it's for council to determine what the service is. What we've suggested is a current method for collecting the type is the verge valet, whereby the homeowner articulates when they would like that to occur. The older model is a one-time, an area is identified and it's told this is when you've got to do it by. And so ultimately it's up to council to determine if it wants the verge collected all at once, so that people only have that particular window to prune their green waste and put it out, or alternatively whether they can determine the better time for them to be able to do the pruning and put it out and arrange for the valet service to pick it up. I don't think it's putting the cart before the horse, because, as I said, if council determined that the trial wasn't successful, or we believe bulk collection is a better method for either white or for green waste, council can choose to do that.
We'll hear from Councillor Jennings first.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. This is going to the cost issue, and I would think that the collection cost under Verge Valet and the city's cost, or it's not collection costs, it's processing costs, that they should be the same. But I think the acting manager, Waste Environment, gave, I don't know if it was 200 per tonne processing cost if it's a Verge Valet green waste collection, but that it might not be that figure, but whatever it was, I think it was 200. Can you just tell me what that was when you answer the question, please? And what is our processing cost if it is different from what the Verge Valet collection processing cost would be of our current service of the green waste that we currently collect on the verge through the bags or the prunings? Thank you.
Sorry, could you repeat the question again? I couldn't hear it properly.
Yeah, sure. If I can remember it and repeat it. You gave a figure, I think, early on, and I questioned before about the $38 per collection fee, but you also said at when you gave that information that the per tonne processing cost of that green waste collected, that was via a Verge Valet Extra or Verge Valet collection system, I think. And I just wanted to know if, or whatever, can you just clarify if I've got that figure right, $200 per tonne processing cost for the green waste collected via Verge Valet, but I might not have got that correct. And what the cost is, the processing cost of the green waste that we collect under our current processing system, which is, you know, Verge collection in bags and prunings. Thanks.
Thank you, through you, Mayor McMullen. The processing costs for an additional Verge Valley would be $139.50 per tonne ex-GST. Currently, we are paying around $36 a tonne purely for green waste processing at the moment.
Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Look, just getting back to Councillor Powell's point about the collection and the bulk concerned. We've got roses, and we end up with a lot of rose canes on the verge, and they would be more than 4 240 litre bins. Now, what has happened to date is that the council come along and take all those roses in one hit. Now I'm going to be looking at doing either 4 lots of bins, and that would be just with those rose cuttings, so I'll be denying other scraps coming in from the house, etc. Or I trade off one of my Verge Valet pickups for the year. Have I got that right in the terms of thinking, please?
Look, I think that's what's recommended, but ultimately the service, you've got a lot of roses, I might say. If you can chop them up a little bit finer, you'll get more in. But what I would say is what we're recommending is for the bulk type. Sorry? Apologies. Yeah, so what we are recommending is that you could. Now, as we've said, is there could be, the council may think that a 360 litre bin option as well for those that have a lot of green waste, that might be more appropriate. So we can look at that as well, because there would certainly be some households that have a lot of green waste, and that may be helpful. So, but in terms of the whether you do Verge Valet versus a large-scale collection all at once, as I said, it's the collection that's different, but predominantly they're sort of your larger branches that are sort of stacked up rather than the roses, predominantly.
Yeah, no, there's no problem cutting up the canes, but it's just the bulk is just there, and it's nice to get rid of them rather than having it in dribs and drabs over a month. Thank you.
Councillor Kosovich has got me concerned now. The green waste pickup service is a popular service, and the officer recommendation doesn't provide for it, and the alternative is that we don't endorse the plan, and that's obviously not recommended. So what's the way forward if we want to get FOGO happening, but we want to preserve a service which I think anecdotally gets some good usage and get some good usage from people in this room too? Does someone need to put pen to paper on an amendment?
If I could, through the chair, I think what we'll do is we'll take this feedback, we'll go crunch some numbers and provide some options for council that could assist in terms of the bulk green side of things, and whether that be in a larger size bin, as well as potential either a bulk collection and or this this choice in terms of the Verge Valet. So each have pros and cons. So we'll be able to go back and have a look at this and bring this back information for council to consider if an alternate would be welcomed, or if the other alternative would be for I mean, ideally, we'd like to know because of the price we need to set at the budget in July. However, if council then want to consider some more information, we could take it away and bring it back to another council meeting as well. But we would just be sort of guessing as to what the fee should be. That's the downside. So, so a little bit of certainty would be helpful.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. I didn't get my next question in after that last lot because I got the figures, but I didn't formulate the question quick enough. So it's just continuing on from that price matter, that the different costs for the Verge Valet collection versus not collection, the processing costs. So we've got $36 for the current price of processing the green waste that the city currently collects versus $139.50 per tonne ex GST of the Verge Valet processing cost if we used a Verge Valet green waste collection. So the economics of that doesn't really make sense to me. It's, you know, from an economics point of view, just on the processing cost, it would seem that our current service is much more economical and value for money, but there may be other costs that feed into, like we have to have the truck to and a person to collect the green waste currently. So, but that's going to be a similar cost when we go to FOGO. But what would have to happen is, I guess this is an alternative, that we'd have, you could still have a small FOGO bin, or, you know, the normal size FOGO bin, but if people just didn't put their bulk green waste in it, I mean, then the processing cost with Verge Valet would be, I mean, with the WMRC processing the waste, or I don't know who processes the FOGO waste, but, you know, the processing cost will be much less. You know, and I would like to see some figures on that personally. So I'm asking for, I suppose, a clarification now, if anyone can give me about the relative costs. And also, if you can't do that now, then can you give us some information about that? Because just on the face of the figures, you know, the green waste collection that we've currently got is much, the processing of it is much more economical than going to a FOGO processing. So I'm not saying we don't do FOGO, but if it's much cheaper to process under the green waste under our current system, and if that could continue, then that might be, you know, economically, that might be the way to go, even though we still have to have the FOGO bin. Also, so there's that issue, and I don't know really whether that's a question or, but anyway, could you just address that, CEO or whoever?
We could probably crunch some more numbers, and I think the question you're saying is, in terms of the green waste, the bulk green waste, not the bag green waste. I think you're suggesting that the economics stack up better for the bulk green waste rather than Verge Valet green waste. Is that what you're suggesting? I just want to clarify. Yep,
yeah, I guess so. And even FOGO as well. I mean, what's the FOGO processing cost? Is that in the, I don't remember seeing that in there, but it probably is.
So FOGO, there's how much a tonne, but 127 or something a tonne, I think, something like that. For FOGO, clean green waste is slightly less, but quite a considerable amount less. But the issue with that is that we're going to be forced to do FOGO, so it's just a question of when. So the bags for the green waste are a good way in terms of getting good, clean green waste. And if we were just to go to a go bin, there would be additional costs as well, because the green waste, then you can get contamination with a green waste bin as opposed to the bag system. So there's a lot of things, I suppose, to consider. But in terms of FOGO, as we're sort of describing in this report, is we're recommending that it'd be appropriate to start the education program. So Cottesloe have just done a very good job of introduction and have very good separation at source, which is really good for them. But there's a time frame required to educate people into what's supposed to go into each type of bin. So that's why we're recommending not necessarily just starting in 2025.
I have another question, Mayor.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for your answer, CEO. it's a bit of a Dorothy Dixer. It's about having a larger size bin for the FOGO. And if you go to a 3, what size bin would that be? Possibly a 3?
Yeah, so what we're suggesting is that some may wish to go to a 360, that you can get 360 litres that are quite reasonable as well. So that would be the recommendation, but it wouldn't be that everyone receive a 360 because many people wouldn't want that size bin. But it would be more a case of those that wish to sort of ask for it given the volume that they've got.
Well, thank you, CEO. The question is more, or the inquiry is directed at the manoeuvrability and the ease of moving a full 360 or 350 bin as opposed to moving like 240 litre bins. And I have that same experience here, actually, where I live in Cambridge, that they provide you pay for it, but 2 green waste bins, and that's much easier than I've got a big recycling thing, and that's very heavy to the biggest bin to move. So what's your view on, the relative merits of having 2 separate bins, which are easier for people to pull, and particularly older people perhaps, or women who aren't as strong as men, or people who are not strong, and having just one bigger bin like a 350 that's full. What's your view on that?
Yeah, so through the chair, you're right, and it depends on what you put in the bin, whether they're full of roses or full of lawn clippings or other. It would make a difference, or bones or whatever it is that you're putting in your FOGO bin. So you're quite right that it may not be appropriate. We could look at an additional 240 as well and price that up for those that would like it. And what we'd recommend is that would be at an additional cost, as would be a 360 bin. So we could offer choice in terms of that for those that would prefer, given as you quite rightly put, that they're not easy, a 360 litre bin, if it's full with particular wet grass or something like that, they can be quite heavy.
Councillor Hammersley.
Thanks. Just to finish on that, I think earlier we also perhaps talked about the smaller option, and that would be good to look at, both for those, equity has been raised, and we've had equity problems with waste in this town for a long time. It cuts both ways. We have a lot of small households in apartments or on very small blocks with no gardens who've been paying for years and years and years for this service that they can't use. And they can't use it unless they get 4 bags of waste, and we've had numerous complaints about that. So I'm wondering, can we offer a smaller FOGO bin at a cheaper price for those households that don't need it? So that's one question.
If I could, through the chair, look, we can investigate that. We're sort of running short on time. That's why we sort of did bring this via an email some time ago to try and sort of thrash out these types of options. There are a lot of options there. What they would also require us to do is make some estimates on what the likely uptake of those are, which can be challenging. So, I mean, we can crunch a lot of different numbers, get them probably wrong, and then have a big increase next year if we get it, considerably wrong. So certainly we can investigate that, but we'd have to make some assumptions. And so we're also going by what what is being recommended to us. So sometimes you've actually got to go back and talk to the Waste Authority and that in terms of those requirements, because the emphasis has been on the FOGO and putting more in that as part of the circular economy and less in the red bin. And so I imagine if we suggest that to them, they'll write back and say that might incentivise people to put more in the red bin. But we can look at all these things. I'm just concerned about the timing and how we're able to come up with what the uptake of each of these scenarios may well be. Whereas an additional green waste bulk collection, you know, we can price that up pretty simply. But trying to work out how many people might choose this type of bin, that type of bin, et cetera, where we just we could do some scenarios, but they all could be wrong.
Yeah, that actually was my next question really, is how much do we actually know about the nature of the households in the city? Because it's very hard to model these things if we don't know what our ratepayers consist of. So is that something that's going to be just too difficult to do, which is why we're taking this sort of broad approach?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor McMullen. It's not something that we had modelled, but generally this service is designed to take food organics out of the system. That's one of the main focuses for it, to reduce that going into landfill. So that's why the Waste Authority has suggested a 240 litre bin to incorporate the green waste and your food organics. So if you only put food organics in, then that's not a problem. But it would be difficult to model or find out exactly what each household produced. We can try and get some figures on estimates from elsewhere, but yeah, it'd be very difficult to model that in the city.
Also, on the pickup service that we've had with the bags, the 10 bag limit that has caused some controversy over the years and very upset people who can't understand why they can't put 13 bags out. Did that 10 bag limit including prunings, or was it 10 bags plus whatever else you could pile up on the verge?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor McMullen. It's 10 bags plus you can put a pile of 3 metres long by 1.5 wide and 1.5 high, and you can put that out each week if you desire.
I know Director Technical Services wants to offer some advice as well.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. I might just ask the Acting Manager, Ops and Environment, just to talk a little bit about the grant funding that we're looking to get, or the city's looking to get through the FOGO implementation. And I think there's some set descriptions or limitations on certain things that we need to abide by to get that grant funding.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor McMullen. Yeah, we have made an application for grant funding through the Better Bins programme, and we have been successful. They've made an offer to us to receive that funding. However, it is dependent on the city encouraging its residents to have the smaller sized bin. If you choose to have the larger size bin, then there has to be a fee associated with that, which there is already. The city already offers that system. But they do set out a best method for collection, the best recommended sizes of bins as part of that funding.
My last question is, under this new system that's being pushed through by the state government, does everybody have to have one of these bins? Can you just say, nah, I just want a red bin, that's it. I'm not doing any separating.
The manager might correct me on this. I believe we have to deliver them. Whether somebody puts them out each week is entirely up to them.
Councillor De Vries.
This is just more by way of clarification, through you, Mayor. It says in the report that the general waste would move to fortnightly on the alternate week to the recycle collection. So that would mean for people, say, for example, who live in apartments who don't have any FOGO waste, that they would then have to manage their waste as best they can, obviously because they wouldn't be able to put the additional waste into, they obviously wouldn't have as much FOGO waste, so they'd still use it, but it wouldn't obviously take a fair few months before they could fill up a bin. So that's just by way of clarification. Have I understood that correctly? Thank you.
Perhaps if I could, through the chair, just to clarify, the garden organics is probably what they don't have, but they would certainly have the food organics that would go in the FOGO bin. So I just want to clarify that. They would certainly have the, yeah.
Councillor Powell, we've got more of an answer.
Yeah, I was just going to clarify, thank you, through you, Mayor McMullen. Yeah, that is also a stipulation under the funding agreement that we move to that system.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, hopefully the last from me. Just following up on a point with Councillor Hammersley as well. What happens if residents say they don't have room for a third bin or they don't wish to accommodate a third bin?
Thank you, through you, Mayor McMullen. That is their choice. We can deliver the bin, whether they choose to use it or want to use it. That's up to them. We can't force that.
But what happens if they say that they simply don't have room for a third bin? Will it just end up sitting on the street, I suppose I'm asking?
It might become a policing matter. No, look, we're required to deliver them. That's the intention, and so we would ask them to store it in an appropriate place if they don't wish to use it. But we'll be required to deliver each property the required bins.
Councillor Powell. White.
Thank you. I guess it's not directly related, but maybe a question on notice. It comes back to the Verge Valley trial. You say quite rightly, I guess, that we are going to have to consider that trial at the end of the period as to whether that's the right thing. I'm interested in what information will be given about the trial. Is it about costs alone? In terms of the efficiency of costs? Is it about the equity of it? Is it about the value for money? Is it about community sentiment? There seems to be a number of things, and I would hate us to get to that point and not have all that kind of information that we'll require to make that decision. So again, you can answer it now, comment on it now, but I think it's probably a question for notice so we know what to expect in terms of the information you'll give us. Okay, sorry.
So if I could, through the chair, so there's a range of information that the WMRC are already collecting in relation to that service and will continue to collect, and we'll be able to avail you of that. And we'll go through the ordinary process, put in the email, talk about whether we need a strategic workshop on it. We can bring in those that are providing that service, and if there's additional information that the city considers important, prior to making that decision, then that would be the time at which the elected members can say, this is the type of information we think would be appropriate to collect, and we can feed back as to the mechanisms by which that may be done or the costs associated with that, and then council could hopefully have the information they require prior to considering the matter as to whether to proceed with Verge Valley or to choose an alternate.
Yes, sorry, I do.
Councillor White.
I presume maybe the have your say will be a mechanism for that, in terms of community input. I've got two questions. I'll be very brief. On page 29, the last bullet point, I was particularly interested in one of the sort of advantages of FOGO waste service was presented as residents would like to play a more active role in assisting the city to meet its waste reduction. Do we have a sense that residents like to deal with waste issues in this way?
If I can, through the chair, depends on who you ask. Some people are environmentally responsible in terms of it's an important aspect of their life, and so yes, certainly people have been asked, when are we introducing FOGO? So there are people that are very interested and happy to separate at source, and clearly also there are others that prefer not to be as I suppose environmentally focused and responsible in terms of how they separate their waste. So it's mixed, but certainly we have evidence, or we have anecdotal information that that moving to FOGO is a good thing for those that think it's appropriate, and there's others that are happy just to stick with 2 bins. I don't know what the percentage is. Stefan and the WMRC probably has a fair bit of feedback in relation to that, but yeah, and look, every local authority would be different within that as well, I'd assume.
Probably related, I guess, is the thing that follows this about the Waste Education Project Officer, which I think is great to see. What worries me is that I don't think we've been really good on communications around waste up to date when I compare it to what's going on in neighbouring local government areas. And again, maybe for notice in the future, but it's always hard when we're going to be voting next week on something like this. But it would be really good to get a sense of what the public education campaign will be looking like. As I say, I've been pretty impressed with what other councils nearby have done, and we seem to fall short of that. And as a household that always argues, which bin should this go into, and wanting to, go to a YouTube channel or something to win a family debate, it would be more information about this would be better than less. And I just think, I guess I'm kind of imploring the administration that we might get information or get some sense of where this education campaign will go and how comprehensive it will be, because I would like to see it myself verge on the more comprehensive side rather than just something which is static on the website.
Thank you. Through you, Member Mullen. Yeah, we would partner with the WMRC as far as the education programme goes, and they've got quite an extensive range of resources. We'll also be using the waste sorted education material, and we'll develop a plan with our communications department, which will continue on before, during and after the rollout.
Probably if I could add as well is the award-winning communications team of the WMRC. But one of the great things about most of the Metro councillors, they share knowledge and information about what has been effective in terms of the education programs. And they've got a long history, because you may recall, those that are old enough to remember, we only used to have 1 bin to start with, and then we shifted to 2 bins, and so the yellow bin has been around, 30-something years. And separation at source has been the constant message. So we would be utilising a lot of WMRC's resources, and they have also got it from other metropolitan regional councils and from the eastern states as well, as to the things that have the greatest impact. Things like bin tagging, etc., is also elements that we've done in the past. So those local governments that do a lot is usually because they've changed systems, and usually they've employed people to concentrate on the education program of people. And that means, that goes into the cost of the actual service that you're charged within your rates. But it's usually those that have been very good in that regard, have employed the people, done the work to get the message out, used a lot of different mechanisms, social media, other media as well, to encourage people to separate at source, and the rationale for it, and why it's important in terms of the environment.
Look, I'll just ask a question as well. It's in relation to this project officer whom we don't actually have yet, and we're not approving expenditure for in this particular resolution. At what point do we recruit and pay for the project officer who's going to do the work on the communications? Is that something which we'll deal with at the next budget? Or do we need them sooner than that?
Through you, Member Mullen. No, we don't need them sooner than that. We would deal with that at the next budget.
So if I could just clarify, we've set the price on the assumption that would include an officer at a particular point in time, and that would we do the recruitment around before the lead up into the implementation of FOGO. So we put together a project plan, remind elected members as to the timing, and obviously we work with our partner, the WMRC, and then we partner with them both in terms of the communication, etc. But we'd bring on that employee at the appropriate time to make sure that all the pre-work and the pre-information is going. I don't have that in front of us, but I would assume it would be sometimes toward the latter part of this calendar year, I'd assume.
Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you. I have a bit of question, and also I just want to share an information being your representative of WMRC. So, Cottesloe, a member, if that's okay, thank you, Mayor. Cottesloe, which is a member of WMRC, have been the first of the WMRC group to go to FOGO, and it's been very successful. It very much would have done that under the guidance of WMRC. And one of the ways of knowing that it's been successful is that the waste is not very contaminated. And even then we can break up that, because if we do get a contaminated load, we can actually isolate that to where it comes from, and therefore give that particular area some more education on, you know, what they should and shouldn't be putting into their bin. The other thing I just wanted to share, just because it was raised this evening, WMRC does not process anything. It is a transfer station. And a very important role is the education and communications. Another alternative, and I'm very much supporting that we offer 2 or 3 green waste collections, and if people want their own private, like a Verge Valley service, then they just pay for it, you know, is another choice. But their other choice is actually to fill up the boot of the car with their clippings, go down to the depot, drop them off, and pick up a load of mulch for free. So we might add that to the report. The other thing I wanted to just add was a question about the waste levy. Now, to cover the costs, which are not, you know, that seem to be quite considerable, to go to FOGO, don't have a lot of choice on that, only in timing. I gather the levy, to cover it, will be a 3.5% increase in the waste levy on our rates. Is it correct to assume that even if we didn't go to FOGO, we would still have some waste levy increase because of our haulage increase in costs and so on, and wage costs, and basically inflation costs? Thank you, through you, Mayor.
Thank you, through you, Member Mullen. The modelling that you'll see in the report suggests that we could provide our existing services without a rate increase. However, that modelling was done prior to us being aware of the WMRC's new fees and charges, and also the 7.6% CPI, which has come on since then. So, in answer to your question, most likely, now that we're aware of those costs, we would have had to have suggested a rate increase, yes.
Any final questions? Councillor Hammersley.
Just one. Can anyone recall how many years ago it was when we got rid of our third bin? Because the City of Subiaco for many, many years had 3 bins, and we used to put our cardboard and newspaper into a separate bin so that we were all very well trained to sort at source. And then we had 3. We had the yellow, we had the, I can't remember the colour, but it was the paper and the cardboard, and then we had our red bin. So can anyone tell, I think it's about 6 years, but I might be wrong. That's my first question. My second question is a bit of an amusing one. Can we put our greasy pizza boxes in FOGO?
Okay, can anyone answer the first question?
Through you, Member Mullen. Yeah, it is around 5 to 6 years ago when we went to Australia. I've started to move to Australian standard for waste and recycling bin lid colours. We had a red bin lid for cardboard and paper, I think, and yellow was for glass and cans, etc. and green was your general waste, yeah.
And pizza boxes. I've heard an answer from the Director of Community and Development, so we'll take it.
Thank you. Yes, you can. As a user of FOGO, it's actually really quite handy to use, and even with a young child, we don't have any issues in with the bin storage and space, and we've got the smaller bin. You can put pizza boxes in the green bin.
Okay, I think we've finished with the questions on C5. Okay, C6 relates to our drainage improvement plan, a topic we've workshopped at least twice. Looking for any questions on the officer report now. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Look, this might be tangential to the actual drainage plan, but during the week I've received a few phone calls from people asking about, whether they could be on the drainage plan, but mostly what they seem to be talking about is leaf litter clogging the drains and causing local flooding. So could I have a bit of a response from staff about how we actually address trying to keep the drains clear during...
Sorry, I cut you off too soon, but I think we all heard it. Director Technical Services, did you get the start of that question about leaf litter clogging up drains?
Yep, through you, Mayor McMullen, we have got a maintenance schedule in regards to e-ducting. Obviously, the leafy suburbs that we've got, we will continue to have some issues with regards to the leaf drop, and obviously through rains where the leaves actually go over the grates and block them to a certain degree. But we still have a maintenance regime with our internal staff checking the drains as they do in their normal maintenance processes during the day. And we've also got the e-ducting of the drainage through a contractor.
Any other questions about C6? Okay, let's move on. We'll cover C8 now because C7 has some potentially confidential aspects to it. So C8 simply relates to financial statements and reports for the month ending 30 April 2022. Any questions about that item? Okay, so going back to C7, report of the inquiry into the City of Subiaco independent governance review. Look, to the extent that we can discuss anything but the legal advice, I'm happy to take questions on the parts that might be open to the public, but if you want to get straight into the legal advice that we need to discuss, then I think we'll go straight behind those doors. Okay, I don't need to call a vote because we're just in a briefing session, but next week we'll be going behind closed doors pursuant to section 5.23D of the Local Government Act, which allows us to discuss legal advice in confidence. So for now, we'll say goodbye to the media and our member of the public, and we'll discuss C7, and I think there's a further item for discussion behind closed doors as well. Or am I mistaken about that? I thought there was something else. Oh, it was too. Yep, it was Dake, but we didn't need to go behind closed doors. So it's just a final item to discuss behind closed doors.
there any questions about the other item?
Go live again. Okay, having asked some questions about item C7 behind closed doors, we're now back online streaming, and there's no further business, so I declare the City of Subiaco Council Agenda Briefing Forum of 21 June 2022 closed at 8:20 p.m. Thank you, everyone.